guys. Every time I make a new video, it's always, I know I've been away, blah, 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 blah. Do I tell you why I've been away like I have with my other videos? I don't know. It's not really that serious. It's just that I don't know. It's partially a reason. Like, I've noticed since my last video, I've noticed that my skin has gotten like really, really bad, and I just didn't want to go on camera with, you know, skin with really terrible like I've noticed like bumps all over my face, and I've been breaking out a lot since the start of the new year. Happy New Year, by the way. Yeah, I've noticed that a lot. Sorry, I'm not organized right now. Yeah, I've noticed that, and I just didn't want to go on camera like that, so I didn't. It's gotten better now. Yeah, that took November, December, January, February, March. 4 months. Almost 4 months. Yeah. Guys, it's been so long. I have hair now. In the start of this year, I decided that I wanted to grow my hair out, and I also promised my niece. I don't remember doing that, but she says I did, so now I'm like, I can't shave it off now. I can't break a promise that I made to my niece. I really miss having no hair. This is cute though. It's not styled or anything. Like, I'm at the point that I have to style it now. Like, this is adorable. This is cute, but it needs to, I'm dreading the day that I actually have to put like legitimate care into it. I do put care into it, but like, you know what I mean? Now that I have hair, I should probably show it to you. I'll fix it when I'm done with the makeup. So today's going to be another makeup video, and we are going to be continuing recapping it, and it is going to be the second part where I talk about them as adults. That's it for the intro. Let's just get started. Warning, this video contains acts of violence towards kids, acts of abuse towards kids, sexual violence, sexual harassment, verbal harassment, descriptions of bullying, descriptions of racism, fat phobia, slight descriptions of pedophilia. I don't go into detail, but it's in there. The book, like, is a warning in and of itself, but I figured I would just give you guys this warning. So if you're not comfortable with any of those things, I would suggest you not watch this video. Or read it in entirety. So like I said before, this is them as adults. So this is 27 years after them as kids. So from 1958 to 1985. So after the events of 1958, the Losers Club separate and they go on their own path. So they each have their own careers and are very successful, except for Mike, who stays, and he is currently the librarian. He's not as successful as the other Losers Club, the other people, the other members of the Losers Club, right? So Mike stays because someone needs to remind everyone of the promise that they made before everyone separates. So while Mike stayed in Derry, he does remember everything that had happened. Meanwhile, the others have forgotten. I think if you are in, you know, the It fandom and just in general, you know that when you leave Derry, you just forget Derry altogether. I actually don't remember if that was like a conscious decision that they had made together, or if that's simply what had happened. So it's 1985, just like I said, and it's 27 years after the initial battle with It. There have now been 9 children that have been murdered. Lisa Albrecht and Stephen Johnson, no, they don't say like what happened to them. Dennis Toria was mutilated. Don Roy was decapitated. Adam Terrell was also decapitated. Frederick Cohen had drowned in the toilet. Jeffrey Hawley was torn apart, and John Fury, both of his legs were missing, and it said that he died of fright. And then we have Jerry Bellwood. Again, they don't say what happened to him, or at least not from what I remember. I didn't find it in the book. The photo of George Denbrough was actually found next to Dennis Torrio. So it was then that Mike knew that he had to call the Losers Club. So another event happened during this time. I said before in the first video that Derry is not that great if you're not a straight white man, a straight masculine white man. Don Hargitay? So Don Hargitay is recalling the events of the murder of his boyfriend, Adrian Mello, at the police station. Meanwhile, 3 boys. They're not even like adults, or one of them is technically an adult. Steve Dubai, he's 17. Christopher Unwin is 15, and then John Webby Garden is 18. Recall their side of the story. So the three boys claim that they didn't mean to kill him. They all recall seeing the clown, and Chris and Don have different stories. I forgot to mention this in my notes, but they were at the dairy fair, and while Don and Adrian were leaving, the three boys see them and they follow them, and they find them at the canal, or at least upon a bridge where a river is, and they assault Don and Adrian, and they throw Adrian off of the bridge. What also happens, and this is very like sad, is that they try calling for help because they're around like houses and stuff, but the lights in the houses turn off and they just get ignored. Very, very like disappointing and sad, which is a thing that, you know, still happens to this day. I don't know why I'm using this. So everyone does see the clown, including Don. Chris says that it took a bite out of Adrian's armpit as if he's trying to eat his heart, and then Don says that it crushed Adrian's ribs before he ran away. Don says that it's the town that killed Adrian, and all three boys were sentenced to prison. So in this part, they go deeper into the homophobic history of Derry. Adrian and Don used to witness a lot of heinous graffiti with homophobic slurs that are geared towards them. In this town, people are scared to stand up for each other, which is apparent as all three boys beat Adrian and throw him into the river, and then they just leave him to die. Like, they were around houses, and people heard them because the lights turned off. They turned off the lights when Adrian and Don were like shouting for help. They just got ignored. So now we're gonna get into the Losers Club and the phone calls that Mike made to them in order. I believe that this is in order. The adult section is the adult section. I believe certain parts are written like a diary by Mike when they talk about them as adults individually. And this is like a before that they met. I have a plan, all right? Don't get distracted. How do I describe this? So they talk about them as adults, like one of them as adults, and then they'll flash back to them as kids. Does that make sense? I'll explain further the further that we go, okay? So we're gonna start with Stanley, because Stanley is the one that actually goes first. I know that these are really bad for the environment, but honestly, these are the best. So Mike starts calling the Losers Club, and there's a lot of detail in Stanley's story, more specifically regarding his wife and like his marriage. That's the thing about Stephen King, is that he writes a lot. I'm not gonna go too deep into it. If I'm being honest, this sounds really like disrespectful, but like Patricia, who is, you know, Stanley's wife, is not really that well, she's important. Oh, never mind, I'm just gonna continue. I'm not gonna stick too deep into Patricia's story, okay? Also, I forgot to mention, you are absolutely going to see the sun come out progressively. So I did it again. I wasn't recording a part of the story. And now you're welcome with this. My bad. The story's not, the part that I missed was not that long. So yeah. Surprise! Stan is now married to Patricia. I don't remember if this was included in the clip that I wasn't recording. So I'll just repeat it, whatever. This section goes a little bit deeper into Patricia's side. Which I mean is fair, she's a new character that's introduced, but I'm not going to go that deep into it, because we'd be here forever if I'm being honest. This section goes a little bit deeper into also the anti-Semitism that Patricia faced. She is also Jewish, I think. I don't remember if I mentioned that. And Patricia's parents are not that welcoming of Stan. They don't really approve of his career choice, and I'm not entirely sure what career choice that is for Stan, other than I believe he's just that's so rude. Other than I believe that he's a businessman, but he's a provider and actually is, you know, successful. It didn't start out that way, but just know that Stan was a provider for Patricia. So I don't actually remember if this part was after the phone call from Mike or before. But there is a quote that Stan says, and he says, "The turtle couldn't help us." And the way that he says it almost seems like he's in a trance. Patricia asks about it, but he just doesn't really elaborate on it any further. After Mike's phone call, Stan decides he wants to take a bath, which Patricia finds really odd, but doesn't ask many questions on it, because it's a part of his routine, but it's also the timing that he decides he wants to do it kind of doesn't make sense to her, but she doesn't act on it. And yeah, later on she goes upstairs to give him his beer, but the door is locked. She somehow manages to get it open, and unfortunately she finds her husband in the bathtub and he has killed himself. On the wall in Stan's blood is the word "it." So yeah, that wasn't really like... I'm so annoyed at myself. I can't believe I did that again. Richie Tozier is a comedian in California. See, now I'm forgetting like where this is. I believe it's in California. It would make sense why Richie would go to California and, you know, become a TV comedian. I believe he's a comedian on a late night talk show. Or this is an appearance on a late night talk show. Anyway, he's a comedian. Makes sense, right? When he gets a call from Mike, he pretty much acts on it right away. He sweet talks the person who is going to give him a good flight. And then this must mean that he's charismatic and good with his words. I think nowadays you would call that manipulative. Athena palette. Alright, we're going to do something fun. Very simple, but it's fun. So he does get his flight, and this pretty much ends in an argument with his manager about future shows. Because as he's leaving, he's supposed to be, you know, he has shows scheduled up. He can't just leave, but he does. Ben Hanscom is an architect. We don't get to hear the phone call from Mike, but just know that Mike did make a phone call to Ben. I should be doing this off camera, shouldn't I? He actually goes to a bar after the phone call from Mike. He's actually well known at the bar and is actually on a first name basis with one of the bartenders, or, you know, the bartender. His name is Robielie. He's super belligerent and asks for a stein of whiskey. He then teaches Ricky how to guzzle so much alcohol with no problem, which includes snorting lemon juice. So his behavior of opening up to Ricky about what the phone call he got was about is really bizarre to Ricky. It reminds Ricky of another person named Gresham Arnold. He sat exactly where Ben was, who was also belligerent the last time Ricky saw him, and unfortunately Gresham Arnold killed himself. This was due to mental illness and low confidence of his adulthood. So it seems that Ricky may think that Ben is going to do the same thing, but before Ricky can even do anything about it, assuming that he's gonna do something about it, Ben ends up leaving. Ricky and another waitress are worried that they might not see him again. Which I feel like, yeah, it's the 80s, but if you are a bartender or the bar owner or whatever, isn't it your job to make sure that your patrons do not drive drunk? I'm just saying, Ricky. Ben's okay, but I mean, like, come on, you can do a little bit better. Then we have Eddie Capsbrack. He is a limo driver now, and he's also married to a woman named Myra, who resembles his mom a lot, and I'm not sure if that's just because she's also fat, or she really does. Well, it is that, and then she also kind of acts like his mom, which is unfortunate. I think that's a thing that people do, tend to marry people who are like their family members. I don't know, I'm not married, so I don't know anything about that. So he still has an ongoing anxiety due to what happened with his mom. So if you guys don't know what happened with Eddie's mom, I believe she's passed on at this point. Sonia Capsbrack was really, really incredibly overprotective of Eddie to the point where it was affecting his everyday life. And now it's affecting his adulthood. I guess you can say this is Munchausen's by proxy, but I feel like Munchausen's by proxy has more to do with the attention you want to get. The attention you want to get by affecting someone else. And I'm not gonna get to, maybe, I'm not entirely sure, but that's what that is to me, so I don't think it's Munchausen's, like, to a T, but it would make sense if that's the conclusion that you, made, you know? I guess you can argue, is exactly like Eddie's mom in the sense that she is worried all of the time. Yeah, she's worried all of the time, but it's more like worried about, to me, how I read it and how I interpret it is that she's more worried about herself. Because when Eddie gets the phone call and he says he has to leave, she's more worried about the poor job that she's gonna do. And yeah, which granted, she's also a limo driver, and granted, him leaving does mean that she has to do his work, so I can see why she would be worried to do that. But she's like incredibly scared and worried that she's gonna do like a really, really bad job. Eddie and Myra, they drive limos and they drive very, very famous people and celebrities. I don't remember which celebrity Myra was talking about when in this section, but she's worried about a particular celebrity and that she's gonna mess up. But Eddie consoles her and tells her that she's gonna do fine. So I don't remember if I mentioned this part in the previous section when I talked about the kids. In this section, including Eddie leaving town and going back to Derry, this is the first thing that they mention when it comes to Sonia. Like a brief preview about Sonia before, you know, we actually like get into her. In this section, they describe a moment that happened at the school. Eddie's PE coach seems that he really, really wanted Eddie to try harder and to perform better. It seems like this coach was really, like, had really believed in Eddie, and he claims that Eddie is like just fine. He like saw Eddie play like a lot with the kids once and, you know, thinks that Eddie is just fine, and he is. Needless to say, Eddie's mom made an entire stink on it and just completely embarrasses him. There was also one time at the shoe store where she completely embarrassed him. He was kind of interested in the foot measurer. I don't think they have that anymore. You know, the foot measurer, the silver one where you measured your foot, the metal shoe scaler, and she just like flips her lid. And yeah, I mean, this is what happens when you don't take care of your mental health, and that includes Sonia. So yeah, and when no one steps in, or at least someone tried, but you know, it didn't go that far. Anyway, eventually Eddie leaves in the middle of Myra's freaking mental breakdown. And yeah, but when he leaves, she's so worried that she's gonna mess up. And then that's the last time that we hear from Myra. Beverly Marsh, who is now Beverly Rogan. She is married to Tom Rogan. She is a fashion designer now, and I think that Tom is also a fashion designer, or he like works in the industry anyway. Yeah, when she gets this phone call, it's like the middle of the night, and it also wakes Tom up. Tom is very abusive to Beverly, and it's noted throughout the book that Tom resembles Henry a lot, Henry Bowers. Tom also had a really poor upbringing. He would often get a whooping, as Tom would say, from his mom after his dad committed suicide. And because of this, he figured it's better to be the whooper than be whooped. So that's what happens with Beverly eventually. While Beverly packs to leave, she lights a cigarette, and Tom doesn't like it when Beverly smokes. So this makes him like really upset, and he tries to put his hands on her with a leather belt, but Beverly at this point has had enough and she really needs to leave. So she ends up fighting back, and she does at some point get away. She unfortunately leaves with no cash or card, but as she's leaving, she laughs and she doesn't go back. She ends up going to her best friend, Kay McCall, to help her out, and Kay McCall is like what every woman in dire straits needs. She's feminist as fuck. She doesn't even ask questions as to why she needs to go to Derry, but Kay helps her get to Derry. Okay, that's gonna have to do it for now. So now we have Bill Denborough, who is a horror author, and some people would argue that Bill Denborough being a horror author is Stephen King inserting himself, which, I mean, I guess. I guess it makes sense. Bill also has a lot of books that have movie adaptations, and so does Stephen King. So, like, maybe, I don't know. He is married to Audra Phillips, and it's said that Audra looks exactly like Beverly, which yeah, there's nothing weird about that. Audra is an actress who stars in a lot of the movies that are adaptations of Bill's books. She may be the main actress for all of them, actually. As an adult, Bill does not have a stutter. Bill may have forgotten his stutter, much like he forgot all about his childhood. So he opens up about his childhood to Audra, but he does not tell her about it. Like, he tells Audra, like, previously that his little brother died, but he doesn't mention that he was murdered up until now that he's telling Audra. Yeah, it's like he forgot all about it, but he remembered George being, like, dying, you know? So yeah, that part goes deeper into Bill as a student and how he becomes a successful author. How he becomes a successful author and how he met Audra. So Audra seems to be the most understanding when it comes to Bill needing to leave, and then Bill does. And Bill makes sure that Audra promises him that she's not going to follow him. That's not what he wants. He doesn't want Audra to be in any danger, and he doesn't want Audra to follow him to Derry. So now we have the reunion. If you're wondering why there's so many gaps, I think I mentioned this already. How this book is written is where I just left off, like the gap, like where I just left off after Bill's section, there would have been another section about them as kids. And now we have the reunion. This is also why it took so long for me to like do a summary on this and like even start this series. So Bill arrives in Derry and meets the Losers Club at the Jade of the Orient. Fun fact, if you guys didn't know, a lot of these like areas like that are mentioned in Stephen King's books are based off of real life things in Maine. I want to know what's going on in Maine. What happened? Why, like, almost every book that Stephen King has wrote takes place in Maine. And I'm like, do I need to talk to somebody? But yeah, the Jade of the Orient, which I gotta be honest, I think that's a problematic, like, way to use the word Orient. Like, there's a way to use it that it's not problematic. Usually when you say Orient, you think of like about like things, right? That's why we call them Oriental stores, because they're stores of things, not, you don't call people or whatever. Yeah, Bill meets them at the Jade of the Orient. It seems like Mike is a regular at this place. Unfortunately, he's also welcomed with the news that Stan has killed himself. So Derry has changed a lot since Bill moved away. There's been a lot of construction and a lot of physical changes to Derry. A lot of places apparently turned into banks besides the Aladdin, which is the movie theater, and the canal has stayed relatively the same. This insinuates that every single like place is now just a bank, but I know that that's not the case. And then obviously Ben is the one who changes a lot, and he tells that story. After leaving Derry, he ends up being a victim of bullying, or continues to be, because it's the same thing that happened when he was a kid. So not only was he getting bullied by the kids at school, he was also getting bullied by his aunts that he and his mom ended up living with when they moved out of Derry. He was also getting bullied by the high school coach. He makes a deal with the coach that if he lost weight and beat the track team's best, that the coach would leave and quit the school. So Bill does eventually do that. He loses weight and he beats the high school track team's best. And then the coach does not keep up with his deal. He does not quit, but he does excuse Ben for the rest of high school. So while this is going on, Ben continuously thought of them and how much they would support him. And I guess that's before that he eventually forgot about Derry entirely. So Mike ends up explaining what is happening to Derry. He mentions George's picture being found next to Dennis Torrio and how the words "come home" were written next to Jerry Bellwood's body over and over and over again in his blood. They vote and they all decide that they are going to stay in Derry and finally kill it. Mike then suggests that they split up and go to certain places that have meant a lot to them in their childhood. Before they leave, Beverly mentions the fortune cookies and that they should open it before they leave. When they open their fortune cookies, they're actually welcomed with like small, tiny monsters and impossible things that are in the fortune cookie. And all of the things that were in their fortune cookies must have meant something and a lot to them individually. Bill had a fly because of a book that he was thinking about that included a fly. Beverly had blood in hers because she was previously thinking about the blood that was in her drain, or at least that's what Beverly says that happened. She was actually thinking about Tom. Eddie had a cricket because of crickets in his home. He had a nightmare about the crickets before the trip to Derry. Richie got an eyeball. I'm assuming it's because of, you know, he's the one that has really bad vision and has to wear glasses. Forgot to mention, Richie doesn't wear glasses as an adult. He wears his contacts, but he ends up wearing glasses later on. But yeah, at the moment that I'm speaking, he's wearing contacts. But he's the only one with really, really low vision, so it makes sense why he would get the eyeball. Ben got 2 teeth with their roots corroded in blood. So as they're in a panic, Richie tells him to dummy up and like pretend that nothing's going on. And they do that when the host, Rose, comes back in and she can't see anything that's going on. They pretend to move on and just relax. And then eventually Rose ends up leaving and then the monsters aren't really a threat anymore. They're just there to scare them. They pay their tab and they leave. And then they go over the things that were in the fortune cookies and explain like what they could possibly mean. So afterwards, Mike suggests that they separate and then they go to places that mean the most to them. Really sorry about that. And then business had finally begun. I messed up again. I keep messing things up and I need to focus. I'm just gonna move on. I don't care. I used Adriana Nicole Cosmetics. I don't know if you can like tell at this point. Okay, we're just gonna continue. Whatever. Ben, I can't believe I keep doing this. Ben goes to the Derry Public Library, and I'm pretty sure that this is the same public library that that Mike works at. Well, usually cities only have one public library, and then there's like smaller libraries, but whatever. Yeah, Ben goes to the Derry Public Library, and he prefers to go to the children's section because that section means the most to him. But it is like problematic, and it's acknowledged in here that it's problematic that he goes there because he's a grown man with no child. But yeah, it's a little bit bizarre that Ben, the good-looking older man, is at the children's section, but whatever. He goes to get a library card as a souvenir, but he ends up seeing Pennywise at the top of the left stairs. He tries to pretend that he doesn't see Pennywise because, you know, he's in a public place with people around, and if he makes a scene, you know, it's not gonna look well. Pennywise like changes its like presence into Dracula and asks Ben what did Stan see before he died. Ben accidentally checks out a book in the panic that ensues. He ends up checking out a book on accident, and it's the same book that he checked out when he was a kid, the same day that he runs away from Henry Bowers. Henry Bowers' boot print was actually still on it. And inside the book where you write your name and the date that you checked out the book in was his name, and next to his name was the word cancel in inky red blood. Okay, this is what we have right now. I think I'm done with the Athena palette. Or at least I'm done for this, like, eye look. Oh, I meant to charge this. Jesus Christ. I am all over the place. If you do this, like you film, make sure you have several batteries. I don't know what I would have done for my last video if, like, that video would have taken, like, entirely the whole day. I changed the battery, like, 10 times when I made that video. Eddie goes to Tracker Bros truck depot. He used to either play there a lot when he was a kid, or at least watch the kids play a lot. Because, you know, with Eddie's, like, condition, he wasn't able to play a lot. So, yeah. There was a baseball field, behind the truck depot. And, yeah, Eddie would be there a lot, actually. And someone else who would be there a lot was Belch Huggins. So yeah, this implies that Eddie either played with Butch a lot or, you know, he watched him a lot. There was this one time he had to catch the ball, or at least get the ball. So yeah. Eddie once felt that Belch probably would have changed a lot if he stayed alive. Because it seems like Belch was like the nicest one out of the 3 main Bowers gang kids. Eddie once saw Belch hit 2 balls over the fence. So I think that Eddie once thought that Belch would have gone pro, or at least tried to go pro. So then he suddenly sees Belch emerge out of the canal, and he's dressed in a Yankees uniform. Then he sees Tony Tracker's head pop up at home base. Eddie also sees Greta Bowie, who unfortunately died when she was 18 years old because of a drunk driver. And it's heavily implied, or at least to me it is anyway, this is how I interpreted it, that Eddie must have once had a really, really big crush on Greta Bowie. In the movie adaptation and in, I think, the miniseries, it's, you know, Greta Bowie is portrayed as like a really big bully, and in here it's not really said that much a lot about Greta being a bully. And he also sees Patrick Hockstetter. Eddie manages to run away, but this unfortunately makes Eddie look really bizarre when 2 kids who saw him run away from nothing. Yeah, Eddie manages to get away. So Beverly recalls falling in love with Bill, not just having like a schoolgirl crush, but having like fallen in love with Bill. She finds herself in front of the laundromat first and then goes home. She expects to see her father, but is welcomed with a nice looking old lady, and the old lady tells her that her father is unfortunately dead. She invites her inside, and this is Mrs. Kirsch. So eventually Mrs. Kirsch's appearance starts to change the more that Beverly is in the house, or in the apartment or whatever. Yeah, her appearance starts to change, but very, very subtly, right? It's not right away, it's just over time Beverly notices that Mrs. Kirsch's appearance starts to change. Beverly sees an antique dresser with the initials RG engraved into it. Mrs. Kirsch tells Beverly that it belonged to her father, Robert Gray, otherwise known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. So yeah, as time goes on, Mrs. Kirsch's appearance starts to change, and her speech patterns drastically change as well. And now Mrs. Kirsch has the appearance of a witch, and the apartment starts to change. Before this, Mrs. Kirsch had given Beverly a cup of tea, or a cup of something, and that actually starts to change as well. What is now, unfortunately, in the tea is sewer water and liquid shit. Yeah, I think I forgot about that when I initially read the book, because I don't remember reading that part at all. She is surrounded by mounds of candy and furniture made of candy, recalls the story of Hansel and Gretel, and this story has scared her a lot when she was a kid because the witch ate the kids, or at least 8 children. She runs to leave, but then hears her father calling for her. She turns around and sees Alan and says that he worries about her. Then he starts to shout profanities at her, starting with, "I beat you because I wanted..." He says, "I beat you because I wanted to fuck you." She does manage to get away, but after this interaction, she does not believe that, or she questions them actually going to kill it. Like, she doesn't really believe that they're going to be successful at it. Richie goes to City Center It's the same place that I explained in my last video, where he sees Paul Bunyan come alive and like never tells anybody. And I'm pretty sure at this point I don't think he tells anybody after this either. Oh no, he does. I'm pretty sure he does. He remembers the moment that he saw it at City Center and the Paul Bunyan statue coming to alive and attacking him. So he recalls these events and his contacts actually start hurting. He sees the marquee change and it's advertising Richie's Dead show. And it stars a lot of late musicians and artists. The Paul Bunyan statue comes alive again and declares that Richie will die and has changed into it. Richie actually uses his racist voice imitation as a defense mechanism against it, and he manages to get away. The clown was gone now, but the statue had changed to Buddy Holly wearing a Richie's All Dead show button on it. Everyone around him was going about their day as normal, so his eyes start to hurt again, and a little girl comes up to him and helps him find his contact lens because I think that they had either fallen out or he had taken them out. And while this little girl is helping him, Richie thinks that he hears clown laughter in the distance. Bill actually goes to the sewer where George died, and he actually tries speaking into it, and he's trying to tell it to come out. He meets a young boy who apparently is also hearing voices. He says that Tommy Vicinanza, he says that his friend Tommy saw Jaws at the canal, and Bill wonders if this could be Pennywise. Bill warns the boy and tells him to be safe, and the boy leaves before Bill could ask him his name. Then he meets a little girl downtown who tells him about her favorite shop called Secondhand Rose Secondhand Clothes. At the shop, he sees that silver is actually in the window. He calls Mike, and Mike allows him to store silver at his home. He then starts to think of the quote he used to say in speech class, which is, he thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghost. But unfortunately, he thinks of this quote, but he doesn't actually remember what this quote means to him. Like I said that this is the quote he used in his speech class, but at the time that he's an adult, he does not actually recall where this quote even came from. He doesn't remember that it's from his speech class at the time that I'm talking about right now. So Bill goes to Mike's class and they fix up the bike. Did I say Mike's class? Bill goes to Mike's house and they fix up the bike. Mike also happened to have wax and cards. Bill spills the new cards and somehow there are two aces. They go inside and Bill asks if Bill had said this quote before and if it meant anything to him. Bill does not remember saying the phrase or what it meant to him, like I said before, and this seems to have made him emotional that he does not remember anything. So we're going to kind of shift a little bit. Going to leave them for now. We're going to leave the Losers Club for now and talk about 3 uninvited guests. Henry Bowers is taken into custody and is, set up and framed for killing his dad, and also framed for killing the rest of the kids from before. Henry is now at Juniper Hills. On this night that the Losers Club is active in Derry, he starts to hear voices of his 2 friends in his head, Victor and Belch. He starts to hear their voices. I believe I mentioned everything that had happened leading up to this conclusion of Henry had killed his friends and the kids from 1957 to 1958, but we're just going to quickly go over that anyway, since I wrote it down. They found Patrick's belt and Victor and Belch's school books, and they also found Veronica Grogan's panties in the home. And this connected Henry to the murders, to all of the murders actually. He did not place any of them there. The police end up bullying a 12-year-old boy into confessing that he killed the kids and his friends. Which is crazy because some of the kids were decapitated. I don't know how you can do that as a 12-year-old. They actually end up threatening to hang him. And, that's when he confesses that he did it. 5 inmates were grouped with Henry at Juniper Hills. George DeVille had murdered his wife and children. Jimmy Donlin killed his mother in Portland, and he tried an experimental body disposal. By the time the cops came, he had eaten half of her, including her brains. Benny, whose last name I guess doesn't matter, was a firebug and a pyromaniac. He tried to set the night on fire. I don't know why I did this. I'm gonna put another concealer right on top of it, but whatever. Franklin DeCruz had raped over 50 women before being caught at Banger's Terrace Park. And oh, Jesus Christ. The age range were between 3 and 81. So yeah, giving very much Night Stalker vibes, I guess, right? And then we have Arlen Weston. He, quote, spent as much time staring at his hoe as he did using it. Basically what that means, his hoe being like the garden hoe. So what happened with Arlen is that the guards hit Arlen with a roll or sack of quarters so hard that he was bleeding from his nose and ears. It's not said what Arlen did to appear in Juniper Hills, but yeah, that's what happened to Arlen at this moment right now. That's Arlen's situation, which is kind of sad. I don't know anything about him, but like that's kind of fucked up. So Henry is constantly succumbed to physical violence at Juniper Hills. The guards would often physically assault inmates and hit them in the back of their heads with sacks of quarters if they didn't cooperate or do their chores, which included gardening, right? They would end up assaulting the inmates, which, I mean, it's very, you know, I don't have to say that it's very bad to do that. You know, it is. While doing his assigned duties in the garden, Henry starts hearing the voices of the Losers Club antagonizing him. He stops gardening momentarily and the guards blast him with quarters. Pennywise gets inside his head and tells Henry to go back to Derry and kill them all. Pennywise, in the form of Victor Criss, ends up visiting Henry at Juniper Hills, but no one can see him or hear him besides Henry. Pennywise uses Victor Criss's presence to coerce Henry to escape Juniper Hills. In the book, they mentioned that Victor is still 12, which, I mean, that makes sense considering he fucking died, and that makes me sad because I really see Victor as someone who cared about Henry the most. This is not what this video is about. Whatever. I said what I said in my previous video. Who cares? Maybe I need to get a new one because the product is like spilling out the side. So disguised as a Doberman, Pennywise actually kills a guard named Koontz. I don't know if that's in reference to Dean Koontz, but that's what that's the name that they are going with. And then Jimmy had also been killed by Pennywise, but this was Pennywise disguised as his mother. Benny actually ends up finding the bodies and hid them in his footlocker. So now Henry can escape and kill them all. And then he hides for the rest of the day until someone picks him up. Then we have Tom Rogan again. And he was able to get the information on where Beverly was when he made a visit to Kay McCall. He ended up like torturing Kay McCall and just beating the answers out of her. When Tom leaves, Kay is actually able to call Derry House where Beverly is, but when she calls, Beverly doesn't answer, and Beverly actually misses the message entirely for reasons that we'll get to in like a second. Tom makes it to Maine and is gleeful that he's about to meet Bev again. Spoiler, he doesn't really meet her again. None of them meet him again. I mean, they see him, but it's too late when they see him. I'm just saying. And then Tom is able to buy someone's LTD wagon and replace the license plate and gets a place to stay. Like, he did that so easily. Like, and then Audra is on set for one of the movie adaptations of one of Bill's books, and she says that she needs to go to Derry. She does not like obey Bill's wishes and wants to go to Derry to find him and, you know, protect him, or at least be by his side. She's threatened by the movie producer, this is Freddie Firestone. If she goes to see Bill in Derry, she will never work again. But her loyalty is with Bill, and she ends up leaving. Her hotel actually ends up right next to Tom's. and they simultaneously await to meet their spouses. So after they see their childhood places, they meet at the library again. They each bring alcohol to their meeting. Richie is now in glasses after the incident with his contacts. So they look to Bill for a leader and for Eddie as a navigator. And they start to remember parts of their childhood. They remember looking through the album that Mike brought, which was the same as George's picture in the room. Ben remembers Bill saving him. So yeah, during like their meeting together at the library, when they start to remember, I don't know why I quoted that, but when they start to remember certain parts of their childhood, is when they actually show the parts of their childhood. Does that make sense? That's how that's written in the book, which is very, like, it was confusing to me at first, but I got it in the end. So Mike goes to the lounge to get his pack of beer, only to be welcomed with the manifestation of Stan's severed head. But it's not Stan as an adult, it is in fact Stan as a 12-year-old. And his mouth is stuffed with the feathers of Rodan. Mike calls the losers into the lounge after Stan's 12-year-old head disappears with a balloon pop. They came in and the room was riddled with balloons on the ceiling and on the floor, and then all of the balloons have boards on them. The blue one said dairy N-word gets the bird, and the orange one said the losers are still losing, but Stanley Uris is finally ahead. So they pretty much leave the balloons alone. There's not really much that they can do, if I'm being honest. And they wonder how it knew what they were doing. One by one, the losers start to remember the events leading up to the battle with it. Richie ends up grabbing a beer, and then he finally remembers the smoke hole, which is why his eyes started hurting, I guess. Or at least his eyes were still hurting, and that's how he remembered the smoke hole. Yeah, he realizes that the pain in his contacts is because of the smoke hole that they made when they were young, so yeah. Then Bev remembers and admits seeing what happened to Patrick and how he died. I could have sworn that she laughed remembering what happened, or maybe I'm just mistaking her laughing when it actually did happen. Then Ben reveals the scar below the H scar that was left by Henry, and they reminisce on the first battle with it. That scar is the scar from the first battle with it, and the first battle with it was at Neibolt Street House. They wanted to continue their stories, but Mike tells them that they've had enough and they should go and get some rest. And then they will meet at the Barrens later on, and scars start unfortunately forming on Beverly's palms and pools of blood start flowing from them. Then everyone else's hands start bleeding as well. And Beverly says, "We're in it to the end, aren't we?" They form a circle and hold hands. Bill, my God. Bill starts to scream out, "Ah, Chud." This is the ritual of Chud, and the turtle cannot help us, but no sound actually came out. The energy in the room begins to change. Papers and magazines start flying, and doors started opening and closing, and then momentarily it was all over. They start to remember more and more now, and then Bev professes that she remembered that her father knew of the boys. She says that she hated him, but still also remained love for him. Yeah, obviously she still like hated her father, but you know, there was still a part of her that still loved her father. So Mike stays behind to clean up, but he feels as if he's being watched. This is actually the moment where he starts to write in his journal, or his diary at least. He starts to write down the happenings since his phone calls to Stan, and while he's doing this, it still feels like he's, you know, being watched. He starts to hear footsteps, and he knows that he's not alone. He goes to find out who is trespassing and who is the intruder at the library. And the intruder reveals himself, and it is Henry Bowers. The way that Mike describes Henry's appearance makes me upset, if I'm being honest. Oh, what am I doing? Like, he described Henry as the face of a man pushed into a premature age, a man who was 39 going on 73. But it was also the face of a 12-year-old boy, because when you really think about it, Henry never got to grow up, actually. He never got to grow up. He never got to learn from his mistakes. And yeah, that's the face of Henry Bowers. Mike still sees Henry as the 12-year-old boy that used to bully him. Henry reveals that he had actually seen and heard it, and it has killed his friends. And Mike tries to convince Henry that it could be using him and that Henry was also a part of unfinished business. But Mike sees that Henry is still afraid, and I think it's very sad that even after all of this, Mike still wants to like almost kind of protect Henry. Like, Mike seems to understand that with everything, or most of the things that Henry did was under the influence of it, and that he doesn't want Henry to be a victim of it like they are, or like a victim of it like the other kids were. And he tries to convince Henry to go back to Juniper Hills because he thinks that he's going to be safe from it. But Henry doesn't want to admit that he's afraid, and believes that if he successfully kills the Losers Club, the voices are just going to go away forever. There's another quote that I wrote down on here that is in the point of view of Mike. The other look he had seen on Henry's face, the tired, bewildered look of the badly used child who was sent on a poisonous path for some unknown purpose. Henry had grown up within the contaminated radius of Butch Bowers' mind. Surely he had belonged to it before he suspected it existed. So this is in the point of view of Mike. So I think it's really sad and almost kind of beautiful in a way that Mike still wants Henry to be safe. That he understands that Henry was in very bad circumstances as a child, and why he is the way that he is, or he acted the way that he did. Not everybody has to like do that or like believe in that, but you know. So yeah, Mike tries to tell Henry that he'll be safe in Juniper Hills, but Henry doesn't want to. Henry just doesn't want to admit that he is afraid, but Mike can tell that he is. And Henry knows that he'll never be safe, and the voices will continue to follow him if he doesn't do this duty. Henry ends up stabbing Mike in the thigh, and then Stan's head reappears in a gruesome Jack-in-the-Box. Yeah, Stan's head appears in a really, really gruesome Jack-in-the-Box, and Henry may have seen someone else's head. Could it be, because this part is written in Mike's point of view, but we don't know what Henry could have seen. It's possible he could have seen his own father, or he could have seen one of his friends. So they fight, and Henry is stabbed in the gut with a letter opener, but it's not like a serious wound. I don't actually know what other damage Henry did with Mike, but he ends up leaving the library and is convinced that he had successfully killed Mike. I think it's Mike that got stabbed in the gut. Yeah, I think it's Mike that got stabbed in the gut. I don't think it's Henry. I'm really good at my research, okay? Because this fight actually ends up like affecting Mike, and it doesn't, like, Henry is fine after that, after he leaves the library. When Henry leaves, Mike reaches for the phone, but the other end is the voice of Pennywise mocking him. Mike ends up ignoring the voice because he knows that it's not really Pennywise, that someone is actually on the other end of this. He knows that someone else is there, and yeah, he knows that someone else is there, and he manages to successfully call for help. Henry trudges around in a daze after the fight, and okay, so Henry did get stabbed, but I'm not entirely sure what other damage Mike had happened to Mike. Just know that it's so bad that Mike almost dies. Why am I so bad at this? So Henry, like, you know, like I said before, just trudges around in the dark. The wound isn't so bad, but it's not worse than Mike's. He manages to hide from the police coming down the street, but an ambulance follows it. Yeah, an ambulance follows the police car, and he questions why there would be an ambulance if Mike were dead. It's at this moment that I had found out that when an ambulance drives with the lights on but no sound, it usually means that there's a dead body in there. Yeah, I didn't know that until today. Or not today, but like when I read this. I'm a grown adult and I didn't know that. Meanwhile, Bev and Bill walk to the townhouse, and Bill ends up cheating on Audra even after, you know, claiming that he really loves her. Yeah, he ends up cheating on Audra with Beverly. Beverly I can understand because her husband's an asshole. So like I can understand that part. I don't understand Bill's part. Yeah, they go to Bill's room and they end up having sex. And this is why Beverly missed the emergency message from Kay. And then mid-coitus, Bev ends up remembering the day in the sewers and that she made love to all of them in order to get out of the sewers. Bill remembers also and says that it was Bev's way of getting them out. So yeah, yeah. While Bev and Bill are knocking boots, the moon starts to talk to Henry again, and it actually sent Bill as his ride. And obviously this is it disguised as Belch. Did I say Bill? I keep like mixing up their names. It sends Belch to pick him up, and this is actually it disguised as Belch. So Henry tries to remember what happened that day in the sewer. Victor is killed by the Frankenstein monster, and Belch tried to fight it, and Henry ran away, leaving his friends. Damn, like, show that you give a shit about him and about your friends. I mean, he is a boy, and again, this was the 50s, and boys and men have a hard time telling their friends that they care about each other. Or at least when they do, it's in, like, certain ways that it's usually not in, like, a cute way, you know? So in the sewer, when they were kids, Henry had actually gotten lost. He was able to make it through the canal and managed to get a ride to his house where the cops were waiting for him. Belch brings Henry to the townhouse, okay? And in the glove compartment, he finds a list of the Losers Club's room numbers in Derry Townhouse. So obviously, like I said before, this is Pennywise disguised as Belch and tells him to get the job done. And I just want to mention, like, out of like annoyance and frustration, how I really, really wished that Henry took the time to go to Victor and Belch's graves and actually say how much he missed them. Because to me, in this part, it seems like he really did miss them and regrets what happened to them. And then I freaking found out that they never find the bodies, and that just like that kind of annoyed me, I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, they don't find the bodies and whatever. But yeah, that's what I wished had happened, and then that was a fruitless endeavor. That was a waste of my time because they don't find the bodies. And then Henry makes it into the Derry house and starts with Eddie's room. Eddie comes face to face with Henry, and he dodges the knife and tries to shut the door, but Henry is just too strong. Henry makes it in and shuts the door behind him, and Eddie breaks a Perrier bottle, like the fancy water bottle. Yeah, he breaks the bottle and uses it to defend himself. He managed to cut Henry's right cheek and his eye, and now Henry's eye hangs from the socket. Damn. So for a moment, I feel like Eddie may have wanted to help Henry also. Henry actually collapses onto Eddie, but he ends up landing on the broken Perrier bottle and is now impaled. Henry rolls off of Eddie and he dies. And Eddie calls Bill through the front desk. And I forgot to mention that Eddie actually managed to break his arm again during the fight. So yeah, he ends up breaking his arm again. So Tom actually has a nightmare. In it, he's actually killing his dad. His dad had died from suicide, like I mentioned before, when he was in the 3rd grade. So he couldn't actually wake up from this dream, but instead he actually shifts into another dream. He ends up walking through a dark tunnel, and all of a sudden he has this itch knowing that there were kids ahead of him, and they were kids that needed to be punished. This seems like more of an astral shift instead of a dream. It felt like he was in someone else's body who was someone younger, and when you read this part, you can easily deduce that this is supposed to be Henry's body when he was younger. There's a soothing voice that speaks to Tom and tells him that it doesn't matter when this was, but Bev's been fucking her friend Bill Denborough. So in Henry's young body, he knows that she has slept with Bill. He approaches the moon balloon that guides him and turns to see his friends Victor and Belch. But remember, he's Henry in this scene. But you know, from his perspective, he does not know that this is Victor and Belch. You can deduce that this is Victor and Belch, okay? Because he's in Henry's body. But it's not in the body. Well, they are in their bodies when they were 12 years old. But Victor is headless, and Belch's face has been mauled, which is, how they died, right? Tom wakes up with a scream, and the voice speaks to him again, and it tells him to go back to sleep and just wait. And he will beat them down there, and it tells him everything, and he starts to dress again. Audra also has a nightmare, but it feels like she's conscious in someone else's body, much like Tom was. She allows herself to wake up, but is welcomed with a voice. The voice tells her that we all float down here. She calls Derry Townhouse, and she's desperate to get to Bill, but Bill doesn't answer, so she hangs up. And under the impression that a grown woman from the hotel may have called him, it seems like there's not that much trust, actually, now that I see this. So now Audra feels a sense of loss and abandonment. There's a voice coming from the bathroom, and then the TV clicks on, and she sees a clown. It had black eye sockets, and its mouth sagged open. This clown actually had Freddie Firestone's head and laughed and danced. Audra grabs her dress and her purse and runs into the hallway. She runs out of the hotel but forgets her keys. Forgets her keys to the rental. She doesn't notice the man who got out of the car parked across from her rental and approaches her. And then the man speaks to her, and this man is Tom Rogan. Bill and Bev go to Eddie's room. This coincides with the phone call that Audra makes to him, but he obviously misses it. They see Henry's body, and Bev says that he doesn't even look that old. Bev suggests they call a doctor for Eddie, and both Bill and Eddie decline this. Eddie professes that they'll get them for murder, and with the knife gone, they won't believe that Eddie was attacked. Bev calls the others, but Mike doesn't answer. Before she can try the library, Richie and Ben come to the room. Bev calls the library as Eddie recites what happened between him and Henry, but a different voice answers. This is Andrew Raidmaker, who is the chief of police, and he's let her know that Mike has been assaulted and is currently in the hospital, and she hangs up on him. When Bev looked at Henry's body when she first entered the room, his eyes were half shut, but now one eye had been closed, and it looked like Henry was winking at her. Richie called the hospital and then played reporter to find out what had happened to Mike. Bev changes her mind about going to the police, and she's ready to fulfill her promise. But now they're too short. Bev suddenly says, "I'm glad I remembered you," in the room. So Richie drives Eddie's borrowed limo, and then the radio turns on, but Bev requests them to turn it off. The radio was already on. Before Richie could turn it off, the radio suddenly changes, and then there's a voice coming out of the radio presenting Richie Tozier's All Dead show. Then George's voice comes through as directed by Pennywise, and he says, "You sent me out and it killed me." And then the car ride is silent after that. So then it goes to It by itself. So before the universe, there was It and the turtle. The turtle had... This is always really funny whenever I go back to this or remember this. The turtle vomited up the universe, and thus people were born. So yeah. But it had come long before the turtle had come out of its shell. So it stayed in its lair as it waits for the Losers Club to come back. So it's confident that it will finish its business, but there's also a sense of fear. But it had known their promise and that they had changed, so chances are maybe it will beat them now. So the Barons actually remain the same. It's almost as if no one touched the Barons at all, that no one came to this place at all. Which is why no one found the bodies, okay? Because no one has come back to this place. So Bill instructs Ben to lead them like he did when they were younger, and he managed to find the old mahogany door they used to finish off the clubhouse roof. Ben trips on the iron manhole cover used to cover the iron cylinder, and it's the same manhole cover they used to uncover the cylinder before. They find a strap under the manhole cover, and the strap belonged to a purse. And unfortunately, Bill recognizes the purse, and it's the purse that belonged to Audra. They go down to find out who's got her, and Bill has Eddie on his back, just like before, and then they go down. They come across the same area where they saw the eye, and then Bev asks why Audra could come down and why she would be here. Like, what is the possibility, right? So yeah, Bev asked that question. They deduce it was the one who had brought her, and maybe it had used Tom to do so. So a figure approaches them in the dark. By the way, it's 1958 and they don't have flashlights. I don't know when flashlights got invented, but I mean, like, surely in 1985, this is in 1985, and they're using, in the sewers, in 1985, they're using lighters. Actually, I think they're using matches. Why wouldn't they just use flashlights? It's 1985. Surely maybe it's symbolism from when they were kids. I don't know. So yeah, so this figure approaches them in the dark, and then Bill lights a match, and they end up seeing George. So clearly this is it disguised as George, and then George taunts Bill, saying that it was Bill's fault that George had died. Bill obviously still blames himself for George's death, and it was revealed that Bill writes about the horror of that betrayal, like in like one of the books he writes about it, but the monster at the bottom of everything was only George. And this is a quote from the book. Bill is finally able to speak the phrase that he used to say at his speech class. And remember, when they were kids, Bill would say this phrase and it would give him courage, and this was why he was able to beat it. It recoils and runs away as it changes shape again, and then Bill senses that there may be something wrong with Mike at this moment. They suspect that Mike may have died, but not yet. They grab hands in a circle and they shout very loudly, "Send him our power," and then something expels out of them and then towards Mike in the hospital. This all sounds kind of silly, not gonna lie. So meanwhile, okay, this is going to get a little bit bizarre. So at 5 a.m., all of the participating men who were in, around, or involved in some way of the major events of adults and children getting murdered had woken up at the exact same time, and they all felt as if something big was going to happen and that all of Derry was doomed. At 5:45, a power transformer beside the abandoned Tracker Brothers truck depot had exploded and the roof had caught on fire. At 6:02, the Derry Fire Department leaves the train station and arrives at 6:09 a.m. Calvin Clark, who is one of the Clark twins, he went to school with Ben Beverly, and Richie steps out of the truck and unfortunately he's electrocuted almost immediately. At 6:05, residents of Merritt Street feel what may be an underground explosion. At 6:06, every toilet explodes, or at least every toilet on Merritt Street explodes. Ann Stewart was killed when an ancient gear ejected from her toilet and passed through her throat. Another woman was actually killed as she was sitting on the toilet. She was actually torn to pieces as the toilet explodes. At 6:19, lightning hits the Kissing Bridge, and then pieces fell into the canal, and then they were carried away. The wind was rising by the minute, or, the wind was getting stronger and stronger by the minute. At 6:46, Mike Hanlon wakes up in the hospital. Mark LaMonica, who is Cheryl LaMonica's younger brother, is dressed as a nurse and walks into the room with a syringe. Mark is possessed by it, and Mark LaMonica attempts to kill Mike. Mike grabs a glass from the table and the possession lifts, but it's too late, and then Mike hits Mark with the glass. And now at this moment, the Losers Club feels that Mike is now safe and alright, and then they can continue on. I bought colored mascara, that way I could do more fun looks, so this was also the reason why I wanted to wait for this, because I was trying to decide if I want to get this or not. I'm actually gonna do a primer first, that way my eyelashes can be white, because when I did this last night it was not working. So at 7 a.m. the wind starts to pick up again. At 7:10 the first severe weather warning is made, and then at 7:17 an old maple on the Cape side of the Barrens falls on the Night Owl store. Raymond Fogarty is killed by a fallen beer cooler. At 7:20 the clock in the tower chimed 13 times, and then lightning struck the steeple. At 7:25 an alcoholic and janitor, Vincent Boogers Talendo, is mopping up the bar from the night before. He's promised a keg of beer, or at least whatever is in the kegs, but the taps end up coming on, and then Blood and chunks of flesh all spill out of it. A keg explodes from below him and the cupboards swing open. He ends up leaving the bar and ends up leaving town. So he ends up making it out alive. So at 7:32, this is Aloysius Nell suffers a fatal heart attack. Yeah, that's it. And then at 7:49, Dairy Mall explodes. Dairy Mall is actually the site where the Kitchener Ironworks once was. At 8 a.m., this is Dr. Hale. He is killed as he takes a walk in the storm. So the standpipe leans just like the Tower of Pisa and ends up falling over. And it starts to flood Derry and it takes out the sundial first. That is in the park, which is very poetic. This is the park where Stan was when he first encountered it as a kid. And then the standpipe starts to roll down the hill, and then something that feels like an earthquake shakes the town, and then the Paul Bunyan statue actually explodes. At 10:02, downtown Derry actually collapses, and then at 10:30, the glass corridor of the children's library explodes. This seems to be the last thing that happened in Derry that day. 67 people were killed and then 320 people were injured. Okay, so now we're back in the sewer. So they had come across the same door as before, but obviously it's now smaller as they had grown up from before and had gotten taller. There was a symbol on the door, but they see the symbol differently. So for Bev, it was Tom's face. For Bill, it was Audra's severed head. For Eddie, it's a grinning skull with crossbones. Richie sees degenerate Paul Bunyan. I may have gotten that wrong, but he sees Paul Bunyan, right? And then for Ben, it's Henry Bowers. So they go through the portal and then they find a spider from beyond the referred images of whatever inmates may live in the deepest depths of hell. So it's not really a spider, but it's close to whatever their minds can conclude that this is a spider. So Ben sees that there's an egg sac and deduces that it may be pregnant and also female. I kind of like this. I'm not entirely sure. It is very wet, but I think I left the primer on for too long. You can barely see it, but I can see it, and that's what matters. So it says that no one but Stan must have known that it was female. I'm not entirely sure why Stan would have known, but that's what it says. It was pregnant and about to unleash an unimaginable spawn. So Bill steps forward, and it's almost as if they assume a fighting position, including Eddie with his broken arm and with his aspirator, and then the ritual began for the second time. So Bill ends up in the Eternal again, and it mocks him, and it tells him that the turtle is dead, and it's just around the same time that Bill goes through writer's block. So Bill is like, or at least that's what Bill thinks it is. It's not that it tells him that your writer's block is the same as the turtle dying, okay? Bill just assumes that. So Bill tried to get a grip on seizing its tongue, but missed as he was thrown and swatted out of his body. In order to understand what the hell I'm talking about, I do recommend watching part 1. I'm not gonna go over it again. So it's the same as before. Richie sees the bodies again. The bodies are in the webs, right? And he sees someone who looks just like Beverly. So then he sees another body below her, which almost reminds him of Henry Bowers. Bev screams, knowing that something is wrong with Bill. And then Bill's nose, give me a second. Bill's nose starts bleeding, and the spider turned, presenting its stinger, and it's planning to kill Bill's body without him being conscious, right? Richie actually ends up running towards it, yelling in his Irish cop accent. It stops laughing, and then Richie knows that he's got its tongue. Then Richie is actually thrown into the darkness, and ends up in the void as well. Richie continues to laugh, and apparently it had believed that only Bill was only able to fight it, considering that Bill was the only one to go into the void before. So there's panic as Richie continues to laugh, but it continues to mock Richie as Richie tries to find Bill. As Richie looks for Bill, he actually ends up coming across the dead lights. So there are lights forming a non-geometric shape behind fossilized wooden stakes, and the light was alive. Bill was there in danger of the deadlights, but Richie reached in to get Bill out of the deadlights. But unfortunately, he starts to slip in as it tried to pull Bill back in. And then Richie starts yelling for help. So time moved very, very slow as Richie, and Bill stood in a trance. So they all just stood here as it started to bleed very badly. Eddie ran towards it with his aspirator and shouted, "Here, have some of this." So Eddie sprays it in its eyes. This must not have been a big spider because I imagine it was very tall. But how did Eddie get it in its eyes? But that's what happens. And then Eddie also sprays it in its mouth. Eddie was grabbed by the arm and his arm was unfortunately ripped off. And then Eddie falls to the floor as Richie and Bill start to wake up again. But unfortunately, this has caused Eddie's death. The spider scurries away and then Bill demands to go after it. But then he sees Audra in the webs. He hesitates to go, but Richie convinces him that it's going to die for killing Eddie. Ben, Richie, and Bill go while Beverly stays with Eddie's body. I'm just now realizing that I don't think Beverly ever sees Tom in the lair. I don't think she ever sees him, which that's what he deserves, let's be honest. So Ben ends up seeing the eggs and then he stays behind to deal with the eggs and he starts breaking the eggs. So its fear starts to grow knowing it's weakened and it knows that Ben is effectively killing the eggs. They describe Beverly with Eddie's body, but I didn't write it down. Yeah, for some reason I just didn't write that part down. I don't know why. I don't remember what happened. Sorry. Honestly, to me, it must not have been that important. So the spider turns towards Richie and Bill, and it's actually terrified as it starts to bleed again. Bill and Richie strike it with their fist, or rather they strike it with their combined force. They actually start to physically fight it and put their hands on it, but it's also the force of the others. Memory, desire, love, and unforgotten childhood. Bill is able to pull out its heart, squeeze it, and it explodes in Bill's hands. So yeah, it's dark now because when it died, the light in the area had died as well. Richie is actually gone. He actually collapsed or was knocked out during the fight. Bill feels around in the dark for Richie. Let me just say this part and then I will move on. There's no answer when Bill calls for him. He finds Richie and then carries him in his arms back to Ben and Beverly. He brings Richie back and Ben finds them as well. They think Richie is dead, but he's actually alive. So when they make it back to Beverly, Bill also finds Audra in the dark and he checks for a pulse. It's very slow and steady. When they leave the lair, they leave Eddie behind and Richie kissed Eddie's cheek. So they leave him behind in in the lair. I don't know why. What is it with them and leaving Eddie's body behind? At least in the 1990s miniseries, they actually carried him out. But yeah, they leave him behind. The mark on the door was gone, and then as they make it out, they find that the street had caved in, and they find a marquee for the Aladdin. They climb out of the street through broken parts of the tunnel, and people find them, and now there's hope. This is it. This is the makeup look. So now we're just gonna chill out. I think this is it. Is this it? I think this is it. But Derry would soon fall apart as people would end up leaving town, which I mean, fair, right? An ambulance is flagged down and Audra is taken to the hospital. Bill wants to go to the townhouse to sleep, and they all agree to. Bill sees the boy again, the boy that he met the previous day, and the boy whose friend claimed saw Jaws in the Barrens, and he's playing with a paper boat. So they know that nothing lasts forever as the scars on their palms are gone. There's a quote here that says, "Nothing lasts forever except maybe love, desire, and maybe friendship." So this section moving on is written like a diary entry by Mike. On June 4th, Bill visits Mike in the hospital. And Mike is told about Audra and suggests Bill take Audra to a place instead of Bangor. The forgetting is actually starting to happen, and Bill is already forgetting what the door to the lair looked like. On June 5th, Ben and Bev say goodbye. So you know how... Oh, I'm not done. I have to do my hair. So you know how particularly in the movie and in the miniseries. You know, it's not just implied that Ben and Beverly get together. Like, there's an entire scene in both the miniseries and in the movie. Like, there's a kiss scene. They profess their love to each other, right? In here, like, throughout, like, after all of that, after, like, Ben loving Beverly, I don't really remember if Bev even, like, reciprocated that when she was a child. It was more focused on Bill. Yeah, after all of that, it's just that they left together. They left Derry together to go to Nebraska. And that's it. Nothing after that, no kiss scene, nothing. They don't talk about their love for each other. I don't even think Beverly really loved Ben because they don't say it in the book. Let's just assume, I guess. So yeah, on June 5th, Bev and Ben leave together. I guess they're together now. So yeah, they leave together. And then Mike is starting to forget as well. But Beverly says to Mike, "I'll always remember you." But Mike sees a different truth in her eyes. I'm not entirely sure what that means, if I'm being honest. On June 6th, Derry's investors back away when downtown is flooded, and Derry's future may be falling. Mike calls Richie, because Richie had already left. Once again, the forgetting is happening sooner rather than later. Richie actually forgets Stan's last name, and then Mike didn't remember it either. And then this is a sign that it's actually really over. On June 7th, Chief Raidmaker actually dies in his office. The tramp chair has fallen through the floor and then onto him. Yeah. On the phone, Bill reminds Mike about Eddie's illness, but neither of them remember his last name. One of them says that it's scary, isn't it, forgetting like this and forgetting so fast. Okay, that's the extent of doing my hair. So on June 10th, Mike writes in his diary saying, "My heart's with you, Bill, no matter how it turns out. And I loved you guys. You know, I loved you so much." So now we have the epilogue. So Audra is still in her catatonic state. And Bill takes Audra onto Silver and takes her for a ride. He ignored stop signs and danger, and as he picked up speed, he felt Audra's grip on his waist tighten. Bill raced to beat the devil like he would as a child. Audra wakes up frightened at the speed that Bill was going, but then Audra starts laughing, claiming Bill will kill them both, but she doesn't want him to stop. And then for some reason, she randomly grabs his crotch. Yeah, that's very romantic. So Audra wakes up fully, and now Bill's stutter is gone. And that is the end of it for now. I still have the third part that I'm going to do, which will be the initial past happenings that happened in Derry. But yeah, for now, that is it for it and the Losers Club. I have officially been filming for 3.5 hours. It feels a little bit shorter than my first video, but yeah, that is it for today's video. Like I said before, the next video is going to include the previous happenings that happened in Derry leading up to the Losers Club. That should not be that long, but I won't make any promises. I feel like I wanted to say a little bit more about what's been going on. I now have to figure out what other book is going to come after it, but we'll figure that out at a different time. So yeah, I hope you guys liked this video, and I hope you guys like how this look came out. I was really hesitant to figure out, or I was really hesitant and I didn't know like how I wanted this to go. I am really proud. I'm really happy that I decided to go with this, because it was just supposed to be all white with white lashes, but you weren't able to see anything. I'm really, really glad that I went with this and that it went so well, especially the eyebrows. The eyebrows were the toughest part. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.